was very fortunate in that my family was able to pay for my going to a private school in Brooklyn Heights and then on to college. But they were all girls' schools, so you never thought you couldn't be number one. At a young age, at a Sunday dinner, I surprised everybody by saying I wanted to be a congresswoman. What drew me to that field was that I read The Muckrakers by Lincoln Stebbins in school, and it just fascinated me what was the cleaning up of government that had gone awry. And in addition, there was a lot going on politically in the United States, so I read 3 newspapers a day to keep me up on what was going on politically. The break that led me to work in the field was my uncle, who wrote Prescott Bush, who was running for Senate in Connecticut, that he had a niece who'd like to volunteer. And I was hired as one of 5 staff running a campaign in a small state. And I saw the work of the press gal and the speechwriter who would say to me, "Now this is a good speech, Jean, read it." I was the receptionist and for the office. I handled the volunteers. I clipped the daily newspapers. I answered the phone, you know, what general tasks there were to keep the office running. The other big break is a rather unusual one, was when I was let go from the Republican State Committee, and I was actually talking on the telephone to the fellow I was dating at the time, and went in to see my boss, and he let me go, and I go back to the phone and I say, "Well, I was just fired." So here's his response: "Okay, when I pick you up, I want you to have the list of the 10 things you're going to do starting Monday." He was out of one of the management schools. And so Monday I had my list, and I knew there was one good personnel agency that I made a call to, and they said, "Oh, come over tomorrow." And I was sort of surprised that I was going to be interviewed so fast, but that was fine. And Thursday morning I got a call from him saying, "Why didn't they give me your personnel papers before I interviewed you? You worked for Prescott Bush in his Senate campaign, and I'm doing pro bono speech writing for him. And you put down Mr. Sidney Davidson as a personal reference, and his son and I are great friends from college. Can you start Monday?" So within a week, I had a new job at better pay. So you just don't know what is coming around the corner. And 10 years later, I was the boss of the man who let me go. I was co-chairman of the state campaign, and he had to come report to me as a field person. So there were jumps in my career that made a big difference. And going with Senator Javits in New York to help with his campaign, and then being asked if I wanted to go to Washington, or would I think to go to Washington. And I said yes, because I'd done so much already in New York. It might have become repetitive. And so I moved to Washington, D.C., and after being with him for 8 years, I had 5 presidential appointments: Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton. So I was seen as at least as a talented administrator and somebody that was acceptable to both parties in terms of my wanting to get the job done, not being biased in what I did, trying to achieve what the goals of an agency were. I worked in 1960 as the only staff person for New Yorkers for Nixon when Rockefeller was still in the mix. And I learned a lot. The vaunted political machine was not so vaunted. I even told off one of their principals at one point. And then later on came back and watched the unfolding of the Watergate scandal. And I knew the players. let's put it that way. And by 1968, I was working for Senator Javits, and I was glad of it. Then I think those are the principal reasons that I was inspired, was the difference in tone and leadership that came out of New York at the time I was there. I guess the crowning achievement was being the number 2 person leading the bicentennial across our country. We were 65,000 towns who were involved, and that we were able to produce 3 elements. The town had to do one thing out of the past, something in the present, and something in the future. So you went to events that were honoring their particular locality or their particular way to celebrate. And if you think you're in South Dakota and you don't have much to do with the American Revolution in 1776, it takes John Warner, who was the head of the agency, was the Paul Revere, we called him, of 76. That he was very persuasive with the legislatures of what they could do. Maybe you write a history of the town, you build a park that is for now and for the future, and tie those packages together so that people learned about their history and celebrated what is America. My family and its history have played an amazing role in my potential. My uncle, who was a bachelor and lived with us here, was full of history in the family, as was my mother. And on my father's side, he came from Grand Rapids, Michigan, but his grandfather was a doctor and was a friend of Abraham Lincoln's in Illinois. So I had 2 grandfathers, both of whom met Lincoln. My mother's father, at age 9, was taken to meet Lincoln in Illinois, in Buffalo, on his way for inauguration. And of course, Dad's grandfather was a friend of Lincoln's, and we have an autographed photograph. He lent him, Lincoln's coach broke down, and so my great-grandfather lent him his coach to campaign in. So if you know those things, you think, well, I better do something. You can't just sit around. If you have a talent and an interest, go for it. I hope my legacy is that I broke some barriers for women. I was the first president of the New York State Young Republicans, which had 230 clubs and about 40,000 members in the state of New York. So to become the president of that was a major job, and I was the first, as I said, the first woman to do that after 32 years of men. Then I was one of only 10 women head of staff in the Congress when I was leading Senator Javits' office. So often you tried to make that possible for others. There was an instance when Carter was coming in as president, and we put together 37 women's organizations that were professional or volunteer organizations that were interested in education, whatever the subject matter was, and recruited people to be appointed to major positions in the government, and they had a hard time getting connected, and it turned out that a lot of the decisions were being made down at a law firm in Atlanta, and they went down to meet with with the principal partner, and then the women there asked them, could they meet with this leadership team? And the questions were staggering. one saying that she'd asked if there was a future for her, whether she'd be promoted, and the partner told her she was just damn lucky that she'd even been hired. You have to understand some of the things that women were facing in those days. It still goes on, but not in quite the same tenor as then. So we try to be very supportive of others who might come behind us. In one word, I would summarize my life as remarkable. At a time when women were just beginning to enter the workforce in senior positions, I was fortunate to be one of those who had 5 presidential appointments and never really was blocked by any disappointing moments in the career. Something always turned up as the next step, and that is remarkable, thanks to a lot of friends helping too, but support from the family. And never saying it wasn't something I could do. There were things that I chose not to do because they didn't interest me.